I wasn't supposed to be here alone. The group tour had turned the corner 10 minutes ago, and their voices faded down the corridor, leaving me with nothing but my own breathing echoing in the hollow hallway. My boots scuffed against the cracked concrete, each step bouncing off the arched ceilings in a rhythm that felt almost alive. The cells on either side were tombs of peeling paint and rusted iron. Skylights, meant to shine light on the sins of the prisoners, were jagged teeth of broken glass. And that's when I heard it, 3 soft, metallic clangs from halfway down the block. I froze. "Hello," I whispered. My voice sounded like a stranger in this space. Nothing. Then, an extra footstep. Not mine, not echoing mine, and a whisper, so close it tickled my ear. "Don't look in here." I dared a glance toward the nearest cell. A shadow moved, a tall figure standing perfectly still in the far corner. My stomach clenched, and when I blinked, it was gone. I wanted to run, but some part of me, the part that had always chased the thrill of fear, pushed me forward. Eastern State Penitentiary was born from an idealistic vision. In 1829, Philadelphia's Quaker reformers sought a new kind of prison, one designed not just to punish, but to reform. They believed in the separate system, where isolation and silence would give prisoners the time to reflect on their sins and return to society as better men. The architecture reflected that philosophy. The prison was laid out in a radial, hub-and-spoke design, with cell blocks fanning out from a central hub. Each prisoner was confined to a single cell, bathed in light from skylights above, which were intended to symbolize divine oversight. The reality, however, was harsher than anyone imagined. Solitary confinement drove many men to madness. Some whispered of shadows moving behind the bars, heard voices where none should exist. Over the years, those early reports of strange activity would grow into the ghost stories that haunt Eastern State today, stories that continue to chill visitors in the very same cell blocks where prisoners once suffered in silence. Eastern State Penitentiary was conceived in 1829 as a revolutionary experiment in incarceration. Its founders, Philadelphia Quakers, sought not merely to punish, but to reform. They believed in the separate system, a method designed to enforce isolation so that inmates could contemplate their crimes and emerge rehabilitated. The architecture reflected this vision. The prison's radial layout, often called the hub-and-spoke design, allowed a central observation hub from which guards could monitor multiple cell blocks. Each cell block stretched outward like the spokes of a wheel, isolating prisoners from one another completely. The design emphasized surveillance, control, and separation, a physical embodiment of the Quakers' belief in moral reform through solitude. Cells were small, roughly 7 feet wide by 12 feet deep, furnished with a simple cot, a desk, a water basin, and a toilet. Skylights above each cell provided natural light intended to symbolize divine oversight, yet the effect often heightened the sense of exposure and vulnerability. Prisoners spent nearly every hour alone, eating their meals, performing assigned labor, and exercising in solitary yards. Communication with guards was minimal and conducted in strict silence. While intended to reform, the separate system often had the opposite effect. Mental breakdowns were common, and many prisoners suffered severe anxiety, depression, and hallucinations. Some wrote desperate messages on the walls, scratched into plaster or stone, leaving behind the faint traces of human suffering still visible today. The prison itself became a crucible, shaping the psyche as much as it contained the body. Life at Eastern State Penitentiary was defined by routine, silence, and strict discipline. Each prisoner's day began before dawn, in cells designed to maximize isolation. Breakfast, if it was provided, was taken alone. Conversation between inmates was strictly forbidden, enforced by guards and the design of the facility itself. The prison employed a rigid system of labor meant to occupy both body and mind. Inmates were tasked with shoemaking, carpentry, or other forms of work within the confines of their cells or in small workspaces, always under observation. Even exercise was solitary, conducted in small yards enclosed by high walls to prevent contact with other prisoners. Punishments were severe for any breach of rules. Prisoners could be placed in the hole, a small, dark, damp cell used for extended solitary confinement. Physical punishment was rare but could occur. Psychological torment, silence, deprivation of sunlight, and forced reflection was the standard. Many prisoners experienced hallucinations or extreme anxiety, and some succumbed to mental illness entirely. The architecture itself reinforced control. Corridors were designed to amplify footsteps and any sound, creating a constant awareness of one's presence or absence. Skylights allowed light into the cells but also ensured the guards could monitor prisoners from above. Windows were narrow and barred, giving the impression of daylight but denying any real connection to the outside world. Despite its harshness, Eastern State was a model prison for its time, influencing facilities across the United States. Its philosophy of solitude aimed to rehabilitate, but for many, it became a crucible of despair. The traces of this suffering, etched messages, worn floors, and the silent stories of countless inmates remain embedded in the prison walls to this day. Eastern State Penitentiary housed some of the most infamous criminals in American history, each leaving a mark on the institution and its reputation. Among the most notorious was Al Capone, the Chicago gangster whose name became synonymous with organized crime during Prohibition. Capone was confined at Eastern State in 1929, and though he was physically weakened by illness during his incarceration, he maintained a presence that unsettled both staff and fellow prisoners. Reports indicate he received privileges unusual for the penitentiary: extra food, magazines, and even a radio, all in an attempt to accommodate his health and influence. Other inmates included bank robbers, con men, and murderers whose crimes captured public attention. The prison's strict regime, while intended to reform, often failed to curb the influence or notoriety of such men. Many became legends not only for their criminal deeds but also for the harsh conditions they endured within the penitentiary's walls. Eastern State's notoriety extended beyond its inmates' crimes. Stories circulated among guards and visitors of strange occurrences in the cells once occupied by these men. While most reports were anecdotal, patterns emerged: unexplained cold spots, doors opening and closing, and shadows seen in the corners of empty cells. Capone's cell, in particular, later became a focal point for ghost tours and paranormal investigation, linking the history of the prison directly to its modern reputation as a haunted site. The presence of such high-profile prisoners highlighted the penitentiary's dual identity: a center of strict reform and, simultaneously, a stage for some of America's most notorious criminal figures. Their stories, etched into the physical and cultural fabric of the prison, continue to define Eastern State as both a historical and legendary site. By the mid-20th century, Eastern State Penitentiary's experimental system had begun to show its limitations. The strict isolation that once promised rehabilitation increasingly revealed its failures. Prisoners suffered from mental breakdowns at alarming rates, and the rigid enforcement of silence and solitude often exacerbated violent or self-destructive behavior rather than curbing it. Overcrowding became a persistent problem. Cells built for single inmates were frequently forced to accommodate multiple men, undermining the original intent of solitude. Infrastructure also began to fail. Water systems, heating, and ventilation were inadequate for the growing population, creating unsanitary conditions that compounded the physical and psychological strain on prisoners. By the 1960s, Eastern State was widely regarded as obsolete. The philosophy of total isolation had been abandoned elsewhere, and modern correctional theories emphasized rehabilitation through education, vocational training, and socialization rather than extreme confinement. Still, Eastern State remained operational for decades longer, a grim reminder of its own era's ideals and excesses. The prison finally closed in 1971. At that time, it had become a relic, its walls bearing the marks of nearly 150 years of confinement, struggle, and suffering. Many cells still contained remnants of the lives once lived inside: scratched messages, worn floors, and personal artifacts left behind. The closure marked the end of Eastern State as a functioning institution but the beginning of its new identity, as a historical site and, eventually, a location steeped in legend and reported paranormal activity. Today, the penitentiary stands preserved, allowing visitors to walk its corridors, witness the architecture designed to control mind and body, and confront the realities of a system that sought to reform but often failed. Its decline and closure are as telling as its rise, illustrating both the ambition and the human cost of a radical experiment in punishment. Within Eastern State Penitentiary, certain areas have long drawn attention for both their historical significance and the reports of unusual occurrences that followed after the prison's closure. Among these, Cell Block 12 is perhaps the most notorious. Constructed like the other cell blocks in the radial layout, it housed hundreds of men in solitary cells. The combination of narrow corridors, heavy iron doors, and the echoes of countless footsteps created an atmosphere of intense confinement. Today, Cell Block 12 remains a focal point for visitors seeking to understand the physical and psychological extremes imposed on inmates. Another significant location is Al Capone's cell. Though Capone was reportedly granted certain privileges due to his notoriety and ill health, the cell itself remains a small, confined space, emblematic of the penitentiary's design. The cell illustrates how the architecture enforced separation and observation, even for the most infamous inmates. Death row cells and guard towers also stand out. Death row was reserved for the most dangerous or condemned prisoners, and the walls there were especially fortified. Guard towers allowed overseers to monitor the entirety of each cell block from a central vantage point, reinforcing both security and isolation. These areas reflect the penitentiary's commitment to control and the psychological weight carried by those inside. Other areas, including the prison chapel and solitary confinement cells known as the Hole, offer insight into the daily life and punishment mechanisms within Eastern State. The chapel, though designed for reflection and moral improvement, underscores the contrast between the promise of reform and the stark reality of imprisonment. The Hole, dark and cramped, was the ultimate instrument of psychological punishment, leaving a lasting impression on anyone who occupied it. These hotspots are not merely points of interest, they represent the extremes of the prison's philosophy. They illustrate the architecture's role in shaping behavior, the isolation imposed on prisoners, and the enduring legacy of a system that sought to reform through confinement. Each space tells a story of control, suffering, and the human response to extreme conditions, forming a central part of Eastern State Penitentiary's historical and cultural significance. Since its closure in 1971, Eastern State Penitentiary has drawn significant attention from historians, journalists, and paranormal investigators alike. Its notoriety, grounded in both the harsh realities of confinement and the stories of suffering within its walls, has made it a frequent subject of exploration into unusual phenomena. Television programs such as Ghost Hunters, Paranormal Lockdown, and Haunted History have visited the penitentiary, documenting experiences that range from unexplained footsteps and cold spots to fleeting shadows and distorted voices captured on recording equipment. While much of this evidence is anecdotal, investigators often cite recurring patterns in specific areas, such as Cell Block 12 and the solitary confinement cells, suggesting that the architecture itself, narrow corridors, high ceilings, and metal doors, amplifies sounds and creates perceptual anomalies. Eyewitness accounts from visitors and staff have been collected over decades. Reports include doors opening and closing without explanation, the sensation of being watched, and distant voices echoing through empty corridors. Some historians note that these accounts are consistent with the penitentiary's design and the psychological impact of its original confinement practices, though many experiences are interpreted by enthusiasts as paranormal. Archival records provide context for these reports. The penitentiary's history of severe isolation, overcrowding, and mental health struggles among inmates offers a plausible explanation for the persistence of rumors and ghost stories. In many ways, the structure itself preserves both the physical and psychological imprint of its former residents. Today, Eastern State Penitentiary serves as both a museum and a site of investigation. Tours often include demonstrations of historical conditions alongside accounts of reported paranormal activity. Whether one interprets these experiences as evidence of lingering spirits or as echoes of the prison's oppressive past, the penitentiary remains a compelling study in the intersection of history, human endurance, and the stories that survive long after the inmates have gone. Eastern State Penitentiary stands today as both a preserved historical site and a cultural landmark. Its imposing walls, radial corridors, and solitary cells continue to tell the story of a revolutionary experiment in incarceration, an experiment that sought to reform through isolation but often inflicted suffering instead. The penitentiary has become a destination for historians, educators, and tourists alike, offering a tangible connection to 19th and 20th century penal philosophy. Visitors walk the same corridors once traversed by Al Capone and countless other prisoners, witnessing firsthand the architecture designed to control both body and mind. Exhibits highlight the daily routines, punishments, and psychological strains of inmates, preserving their stories for modern audiences. At the same time, the penitentiary's reputation for paranormal activity has cemented its place in popular imagination. Tours, special events, and media coverage frequently reference reported ghost sightings, unexplained sounds, and eerie atmospheres. While these accounts remain unverified, they add a layer of cultural fascination, blending the historical reality of the prison with legends that have grown over decades. The lasting legacy of Eastern State Penitentiary lies in this duality. It is a monument to both the ambition and the failures of early prison reform, and a site where history and folklore intersect. Its stories of isolation, notoriety, and human endurance continue to resonate, offering lessons in the consequences of extreme punishment and the power of place to retain the echoes of its past. Even now, nearly 2 centuries after its construction, the penitentiary remains a symbol of the complex relationship between justice, punishment, and memory, a place where the walls themselves seem to hold the voices of those who once lived, suffered, and died within them.
Thank you for hanging around until the end of our tale. Every view is appreciated. If you have enjoyed it, please hit that like button and considering commenting and subscribing.